How did I end up here? Has that ever happened to you? I'll tell you a time it happened to me, and I'm going to tell you a time that it happened to my wife, and I may get in trouble because I didn't ask her for permission to share this story, but we're 19 years into this, and she just knows that's how it goes. And so there was one time when I was a freshman in college at HBU. I lived on the campus at HBU, but on the weekends I would come home to my parents' house on Saturday night so that I could be there at church on Sunday morning because I was the youth pastor at the church. And so it was easier for me to come on Saturday night home to my mom and dad's house and stay the night there and then be right close to the church than it was to try to get up on Sunday morning and drive. And so one weekend, it was near finals in my second trimester. And so I was cramming and studying and trying to get some stuff done that weekend because I knew I had a busy weekend with youth activities. And so I was up on Friday night really, really late. And then Saturday we had a youth activity. And then Saturday night I realized that I left something that I needed for Sunday at my dorm. And so I drove all the way across town at about 1 a.m. to HBU's dorm, went in my dorm room, got what I needed. I don't remember what I had to pick up. And then I got in my car, and I was exhausted at this point. And I'm not kidding you. I got in my car, and I got on 59 to go toward my parents' house, and I do not remember one thing from that drive. And I was at my parents' driveway, and I actually thought, how did I end up here? I don't know if I was sleep driving. I don't know, if I just blacked out. I honestly cannot remember one thing about that drive. And I remember that night kind of freaking out, how can you not know how you ended up here? You know, I know the path that I would have taken would have been 59 to 610 to 45, but I cannot remember one thing about that drive. Has that ever happened to you? Now, when it's driving, it freaks you out a little bit. But have you ever done that in your life? You kind of get to a moment and you look at your circumstances or the mess that you might be in and you think, how in the world did I end up here? I told you I was going to share a story about my wife. My wife, when I was in the fire department for the city of Houston, I worked at 610 in Lockwood, which is basically one exit east of 59 off 610. So she was going to come up to the station one day and she was going to bring something. I don't remember why. I'm sure she probably just wanted to come hug me, and because she loved me that much, and because we were pretty much newlyweds at that time. And so she's coming, and so she said, "Hey, I'm leaving." And so then I'm waiting for her. I know it takes about 30 minutes to get to the fire station from our apartment, and I'm waiting and waiting and waiting, and she doesn't show up. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe she was a little delayed leaving or whatever. So Leslie calls me. And she's like, "Hey, I'm near the Galleria." Now, if you're not familiar with the city of Houston, Houston has what they call a loop. And it's called Loop 610. And a loop means it's a circle. If you take 59 south and you go east on 59 toward what would be the bridge, the what is it called? The Houston Ship Channel. Thank you. The Houston Ship Channel. Go west, it's going to take you to 45, then it's going to take you to 290, and then I-10, and then the Galleria. And the Galleria was pretty much halfway around the loop from where I was. And she's like, I don't know what happened. Is this close? I'm like, no, babe, it's not close. I told you, come 59 south and go 610 east, and we're the second exit after Hirsch Road off of 610. And she's like, well, I thought that, but I just kept thinking, I don't see Lockwood. That was the number. And so she's like, so what do I do? And I said, well, you can either continue around that loop and it will get back to us, or you can U-turn and continue on that loop, or the other option is just go on home, babe. I love you. The sentiment was great, right? But we have these moments in our lives where we can't figure out how we got here. So in Proverbs chapter 3, I want to take you back. Some of you were missing a couple of weeks ago, so I want to just read a couple of verses, make a couple of comments, and then I want to study the lives of two men, an episode in their lives that I think will really solidify this principle that we want to talk about today. Proverbs chapter 3, beginning in verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. when I taught this message a few weeks ago, I said there were 3 instructions in that verse that were followed by one promise. He says, first of all, trust in the Lord with all of your heart. The second instruction is, do not lean on your own understanding. The third instruction is, in all your ways acknowledge him. And then the promise is this: he will make straight, or he will direct your paths. So trust in the Lord, don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him. And that word acknowledge, I learned something this week. I don't know if you could tell I'm a changed man. I preached at a summer camp up in Garrison, Texas. It's right between Garrison and Timpson and Carthage and over there near Tenaha and all those other big places you know about, right? And I would ask people at the camp, like, what church are you from? And they're like, we're from Chiro Hill Baptist. I'm like, where is that? Well, it's right there between Tenaha and Carthage, but I'm telling you, if you blink, you miss it. I don't even know what that means. But one of the things that I learned, I became a country person, because when you're driving on the road in the country, you have to wave at everybody. You ever notice that? And you don't have to know them. But you don't do like, I found this out because I had to ask for some instructions. You don't do a full-blown wave. You're driving down the road, and then you see the person in the other car, and you're just watching, make sure they're not going to come in your lane, and then you get this. It's crazy, isn't it, Ellie? They just do a finger up to you. And I'm like, all right. And so everybody that I passed did that. They do the finger up or 2 fingers up. And so I'm like, hey, when I pass them, like, I'm in the country, like making fun of. I didn't do that. But, that's what you do when you're driving in the country. I'm a city boy, but you acknowledge everybody. You don't even have to know them. You just give them a finger, And now in Houston, that has a different connotation, doesn't it? I mean, in the country, they're all, good, wholesome people, and they give you a finger, and it's a good thing. In Houston, you're like, hey, test your walk with Jesus, right? And so when we think of the word acknowledge, what I don't want you to think that Solomon is saying in this proverb is, all you have to do to God is just give him a little wave, like, yep, I see you there. The word acknowledge means to give him the proper respect and reverence that is due to a king. So we trust in the Lord, we don't lean on our own understanding, and in all our ways acknowledge him. And notice the promise in verse 6, he will direct your paths. And I made the point a couple weeks ago that most of us do not have an information problem when it comes to being in spots or being in places where we shouldn't have been. What most of us have is a wisdom problem, and we have a direction problem. The truth is, like when Leslie was coming to the fire station, I had told her, hey, go east on 610, but she went west. And that direction took her in a place that she didn't want to go. She made a decision to go west, and that led her to a certain place. And so what I want you to see, what I want to teach you about today is that most of the times in our lives, if we find ourselves at a spot that we wish we weren't in, if we just go back a little bit in our lives and we begin to assess where we are and the path that's led us here, most of the time where we end up started with some decision. We made a decision somewhere along the way, and most of the time when we made the decision, we had good information, but rather than trust in the Lord and submit to his will, we said, I'm going to lean on my own understanding. I'm going to do what I think should be done in this situation. And then when we make a mess of it because we didn't trust the Lord, what we ask the Lord is, we want you to fix the mess. But there are some times that we end up where we are because of decisions that we made, and there are consequences for those choices. And so some things that we blame on God really can't be blamed on God. We took a wrong turn somewhere. And that's why I want to share you that principle again. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. Now, if there is anyone in the history of the world that would have known that truth, it's got to be the man who wrote it, right? As we've been studying through the Proverbs this summer, in the book of Proverbs, most of them were written by Solomon, who was the wisest man to ever live. So I want to study a part of his story today. So I want you to go into the book of 1 Kings chapter 3. Most of the times when I look back at my life, when I ended up at the wrong spot, where I never thought I would be, and I asked the question like, how in the world did you end up here? What I have done is I've traced it back, and I can see that at some point along the way, I made a poor choice. And I think that we're all prone to do this in our lives. We make choices sometimes based on our own intelligence or our own rationale, what we think is best, rather than truly trusting in the Lord. And I think of going golfing with my dad about a year ago. Actually a couple of years ago. They were living up in Carlisle, Texas, which is between Livingston and Trinity. And there's this little, I think it's called like Pawpaw Bill's golf course out there. And Dad said, you want to go play golf course. It's basically a cow pasture. The hazards are like hay bales and things like that, okay? They don't have lakes and sand traps. It's like hay bales and tractors, you know. So anyway, you get a relief from the tractor though. And so I was driving along and my dad's telling me how to get there because there's no signs, but my dad's been there a lot of times. And so we get to the golf course and then we're leaving the clubhouse and there's no signs again. And so I asked my dad, like, well, where's hole 1? And he says, hole 1 is over here. So we drive down there. And so we're playing a few holes. And then we get to this one hole. It's actually a pretty beautiful hole. It goes down to a lake. But from the tee box, you're looking out at the fairway and the fairway just falls off and you can't see over it. It's actually kind of a pretty cool golf hole. Now, if you're not a golfer, which I know a lot of you are not, and so you're probably like, why are you sharing this story? Let me share what you do when you don't know where the fairway is in golf. If you've never played the course before, what you do is you stand on the tee box and you look out across the horizon, and you can figure that most golf holes are not going to have trees right in the middle. So you kind of look at it and you say, okay, it looks like there's a pathway there through to the left, and so you think it's what's called a dogleg left. And so you look at the course and you try to figure out which way the path is going to go or which way the fairway is going to go. But sometimes when you look out, it looks like it's going to go a certain way. And on that particular day, I thought it was a dogleg left, which sets up perfectly for my golf swing. And so I was super excited about it. And my dad says, hey, don't be deceived. It looks like it goes left, but it goes right. And to the right, it's all trees. And I'm thinking to myself like, okay, I know my dad's kind of getting up there in years and maybe he forgot. I know it's ugly to say, but I thought it because we get real competitive on the golf course. And he would tell me it goes to the right and then you go to the right and there's a lake. Oh man, my bad, it went left. Sorry about that. So I'm thinking like, I don't know about that. So I'm looking at it and I'm trying to figure it out. And in that case, I didn't trust my dad. And so I played the ball to go fade to the left and get over the hill. And guess what's down there? A big fat lake. You know why those trees were open like that? Because trees don't grow in lakes apparently. And so my ball was right in the middle of that. And my dad said, well, I told you it went right. I said, yeah, I know, I just sliced it. That's what you do in golf. You just flat out lie. Like I was aiming right, Dad, but I just sliced it, went right into that lake, right? Because here's the thing about trusting God. And this is what I want you to see today. Sometimes when we make decisions today, we don't know exactly where the path is going to lead. And sometimes we make a decision and we don't know what that decision is going to lead us to down the road. But there is someone who does know. And it's God. So Solomon's story, the man who wrote this, I want you to look in 1 Kings chapter 3. In 1 Kings chapter 3, in the first few verses, you find that Solomon is going to have a conversation with the Lord. Now, Solomon at this time, if you don't know the story, Solomon is David's son. And Solomon is about 20 years old when he becomes the king of the nation. And so in 1 Kings chapter 3, God asks him in verse 5, whatever you want, I'll give it to you. Notice what verse 5 of 1 Kings 3 says. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, ask what I shall give you. Now I want you, if you're past 20, to think back to when you were 20 years old, and if God said to you, I will give you anything that you want, what would your answer have been? Let's hear them. Money. Money. Anybody else money? Health, he said? Okay. What would you have asked for at 20? Do what? A car? Good. A college degree with no more work? Yes. I'm all in that cart. Yep. A good maid? All right, good. Mate. I thought you said a maid. Sorry, a mate. A mate. Good. Okay, good. Sorry. Just didn't hear that correctly. I want you to look down to verse 7. Solomon, who's been asked by God, whatever you want, I'll give it to you, says this, "And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of David my father, although I am but a little child. I do not know how to go out or to come in." You see what he's saying there? I don't really know how to do what I'm doing right now, right? I'm young, I've become king, I don't know where I'm going, I don't know which way is up. And notice this, "And your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this, your great people?" I promise you, that's not what I would have asked for at 20 years old. My request would have probably been very similar to yours. I was driving a Geo Metro at the time. That's what all the ladies said too. So I was praying for a mate too that would like Geo Metros, and come on in, it's a 4-door, don't worry. But God was so pleased with what Solomon requested. Notice down at verse 11. "And God said to him, because you have asked this, and you have not asked for yourself long life or riches, or for your enemies to be killed, the life of your enemies, but you've asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right. Behold, I now do according to your word. Behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you has been before you, and none like you shall arise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that no other king shall compare with you all your days." Man, that's a pretty good deal, don't you think? You ask for something that's good and you say, "Lord, what I want is I want wisdom. I want a discerning heart. I want to be able to govern your people well and make decisions that are right." And God was so pleased with what Solomon said that God promised him even more. And what God promised him in those verses came true. Solomon, during his reign, it was known as the golden age of Israel by historians. There were riches and wealth. The people of God they were just living in abundance. They had a great period of time in their lives where they had riches and wealth, and all that you could have asked for, they had it. In fact, in the Bible that talks about the Queen of Sheba came to see Solomon because the reputation of his glory and of his riches and of his power and his wealth were world known, and she came and she saw it and she affirmed that yes, the splendor was too much to be described. And so everything that God promised to Solomon came true. But before this episode, I want you to look back at verse 1 of 1 Kings chapter 3. Solomon made a marriage alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And he took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David until he had finished building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. One verse, seemingly inconsequential compared to what follows, this, "What do you want?" And "I want wisdom," and God blesses him with all this wisdom and wealth and riches and all of these different things. But one seemingly small verse is going to come back to haunt Solomon down the road. In verse 1, Solomon made a decision, and the decision was actually a political decision. He entered into a marriage covenant with the Pharaoh's daughter. Now, politically, this was strategic, and this would be common at that time. If you had an enemy or another country that bordered your country, then what you would sometimes have happen is there would be an arranged marriage of some sort between someone from the king's family and the king or the leader of the other country, or someone from their family. And by entering into this marriage covenant, basically what would happen is you would guarantee that that country would never invade you, because that country now was ruled, or at least in part ruled, by somebody that was connected to you by family. And so Solomon made a good political decision. He made a decision that he felt would benefit his country. And from the eyes of the world, that would certainly seem to benefit the nation of Israel. But the question is, why did Solomon do it? Did Solomon do that because that's what God asked him to do? Did Solomon marry this woman because that's what God led him to do? Or did Solomon do it because he thought that this would be a good alliance with another country that would provide more safety and more security for God's people. So Solomon made a decision. And that decision was to marry someone that God in his word had strictly forbidden God's people from marrying. In Exodus chapter 34, as the people of God were coming out of the nation of Israel and they were getting ready to enter into the promised land, God told them that when you enter the promised land, you are not to marry people from other countries and other cultures. And it wasn't because of race, it wasn't even because of the culture. What God knew about these other nations and these other people was that they had a heart problem. That they were pagan cultures, they were pagan believers. And so they didn't believe in God. And so God told his people, listen, do not marry the daughters of the people, the inhabitants of the land. Because what God knew is that if their hearts were changed, if their hearts were drawn to these people, their hearts ultimately would be drawn away from God. So turn to chapter 11 of 1 Kings. In 1 Kings chapter 11, I want you to look at verse 1. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women. And then go down to verse 2. From the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, you shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you. Notice this. For surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. But Solomon clung to these in love. And he had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. Those 7 words at the end of verse 3 are a tragedy that I have seen repeated more times in my life than I want to remember. When I was a youth pastor, I used to encourage the kids in our youth group. You guys have heard all the stories about how strict I was. But one of the things that the Bible teaches is that evil company corrupts good people. And so what God says is not that we shouldn't be with people that are unbelievers. In fact, the Bible says we should be with people who are unbelievers. But our hope with them and those relationships is to bring them to the hope of the gospel, that Jesus died, was buried, and rose again for their sin, just like he did for mine, and that God can change your life for the better. But I used to tell young people, especially when it came to dating, you need to be very careful about the people that you select when you date them. And just because someone goes to the youth group, just because someone goes to church, doesn't necessarily mean they need to be a person that you should date. Because I was a person in the youth group in church, and I wasn't always doing the best things in my life. And so I told people, I told our kids, you need to be careful. And inevitably what would happen is they would enter into a relationship with someone. And I was guilty of this in high school. I entered into a relationship with someone and I dated them for most of my high school years. And it was not a good relationship. She wasn't really someone that was pursuing Christ. And I had learned from that I had given so many years and so much time and energy to her that I wish if I could go back, I would redo it all again. You see, when God said to the people of Israel, listen, when you go into the land, don't marry the foreign women. It had nothing to do with their country. It had nothing to do with their nationality, had nothing really to do with skin color, anything like that. There wasn't any racism in it, anything like that. What God knew and what he said to the people is, if you marry them, they are going to turn your heart away from God. That's what he told them. Did you hear him say it? And Solomon knew that's what God had told him. But Solomon leaned on his own understanding. If you look at it in verse 1 of all those different countries that are mentioned in 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 1, they are all the countries that surrounded the nation of Israel. And so he just entered into these marriage relationships with women from these other countries because he thought in some way that would provide him some protection. But did you notice what happened at the end of verse 3? What was it that God said happened to Solomon? He married them, and his intent when marrying them was good. I'm going to do this and enter into this marriage covenant so that I can protect God's people and have a good, strong political moves that I've made. But notice what happened at the end of verse 3. They turned his heart away from God. I saw this happen to so many kids in my youth group. They'd start dating someone. Sometimes it was someone who claimed to be a Christian, sometimes it wasn't. And before long, that person fell away and abandoned God. I've seen it happen so many times. And what God is always interested in is our hearts. Notice verse 4. For when Solomon was old, his wives had turned away his heart after the other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not wholly follow the Lord, as David his father had done. How could Solomon have ended up there? Seriously, what did he ask for in chapter 3? An understanding and a discerning heart to know how to govern your people and to know right and wrong and to make right decisions. How is it that Solomon could end up in this place, not only where his heart is turned away from God, but his heart is turning to other gods? He's worshiping false gods. How could it happen? 1 Kings chapter 3 and verse 1. Solomon made a decision where he leaned on his own understanding, and he did not trust in the Lord as he should have. And because of this, Solomon fell into disgrace. And after his reign, the golden era of Israel, the nation of Israel, divided into the northern and the southern kingdom, Israel and Judah. And the main division was over idolatry among God's people. Well, who had led in that effort? King Solomon, the wisest man to ever live. Now, I want you to turn just a couple books back to 1 Samuel chapter 17. And I want to very quickly just share with you the story, a story that many of you are going to know pretty well, the story of Solomon's father, who was King David. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, you find David is just a shepherd boy, and so his father Jesse sends him to give some food and some supplies to his brothers who are serving in the Israelite army. So when David gets to the armies, they notice that the Philistines are on one side and the Israelites on the other side. And every day, this man named Goliath, who was the champion of the Philistine army, would come out onto the field and he would talk trash and taunt God's people. And so when David got there, he saw this happen and he asked his brothers, what's the deal with this guy? This guy's coming every day and he's defying the armies of God. Notice in 1 Samuel chapter 17 and beginning in verse 26. And David said to the men who stood by him, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of God? David says, look, it's not right that this guy who is a pagan, an unbeliever, is standing up and telling us how weak and how pitiful God's people are. What's going to be given to the guy that beats him? And they go on to tell him that he would get the position with the king and his family and all these different things. And notice down in verse 32, and David said to Saul was the king, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. So David tells the guys, hey, look, this guy, we can beat him. I can beat him. And word gets to Saul, and Saul calls for David, and David goes into Saul, and David says to him, don't let your heart be worried. Don't worry about this guy Goliath. I will go out there and fight Goliath. And I want you to notice verse 33. This is really important. And Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth. Sometimes God will lead you down a path, and as you're trusting him, he will tell you, your job right now is to go fight that giant. What I want you to see in verse 33 is the moment you make the decision, I'm going to trust God, and I'm going to follow his path, and I'm going to do exactly what God asked me to do. Not everyone is going to be crazy about it. And when you tell them what you're doing, they are going to say things to you that are reasonable and rational and logical. Everything that Saul said to David in verse 33 is what most of us would have said to David as well. Notice what he said to him. You are not able to beat this giant. Goliath was 9 feet tall. David was a boy. So from our standpoint, is what Saul said right? You're going to send Andrew Baumgartner out to fight with Shaquille O'Neal? And Andrew's a pretty strong guy. We'd say, no, he's not able to beat him up. So what Saul said was completely reasonable. The second thing he tells him, you're a kid. You're telling me that the one soldier I'm going to take and put him out there in front of Goliath, I'm going to take a kid rather than one of my warriors, someone that's my men of valor. You're telling me that David is the one, the boy is one that's an untrained warrior. He has no military training. We're going to send him out to fight against the giant. Is that reasonable? Seems pretty reasonable to me. If I'm in a gunfight, I want somebody who shot a gun. You know what I'm saying? On my team. The last thing he told him was that Goliath has been a man of war since he was a kid. You cannot stand up against the power of this giant. And I think that that's pretty reasonable. But look at verse 34. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. Just a couple of questions from what David said to Saul. Who did David think would be responsible for the victory he was about to have? Him or God? God. Who did David believe would give him the victory against Goliath? The same God who had given him victory against a bear and a lion. I've never fought a lion before, but if I grab one by the beard and kill it, you should probably just think I'm a man. You know what I'm saying? Seriously, like I told you about that jogger in Colorado, he should get Athlete of the Year for choking a mountain lion with his bare hands. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Well, it's a cub. I don't care. It's a mountain lion. I don't care if it's a cub or not. It could be a kitty cat. But I recently discovered something as I was studying this week. I want you to look at verse 38. After Saul tells him to go and the Lord be with you, Saul clothed David with his armor, and he put a helmet of bronze on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. And David strapped his sword over his armor, and he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. Then David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. So David put them off. And I've heard this story since I was a kid. And so that was not anything new. Saul, who's going to send David out to battle against the Philistines, says, I want you to have my armor. I want you to have my weapons. And David's response was, I can't go out here and fight with these weapons. I have not proven them before. But this next verse, verse 40, is what really struck me. Because I want you to look at what David took in his hands. You ready for it? He took his staff in his hand, and he chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in the shepherd's pouch. And his sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. So what did David take into battle? He took his shepherd's staff, he took his shepherd's pouch, he took 5 smooth stones and a sling, and then there's one more thing. My kids, who said that? Geronimo, you're the man. He had God. David's trust was not in his staff or his shepherd's pouch or the stone or the sling. His trust was in God. My kids, when they were younger, would ask me, and they still do sometimes, if you could have any superpower, Dad, what would you have? So kids, if you could have any superpower, what would it be? If you could have a superpower, what? Invisibility. Good, Adam. Exactly. What else? Say it out loud. You want to be fast? Stretch. You want to be stretchy? You want to be stretchy? Oh, my ankle. Sorry. Strength, incredible strength. The ability to fly. The ability to graduate without having to work in school. Amen. Hallelujah. That's a superpower. Here's the truth in our lives. We truly do have a supernatural power with us every moment of every day. For every decision that we make, God lives in us. And what David knew going into that battlefield was that God had told him, okay, you go fight him. And other people told him, nope, that's not the right thing. You're not the right person. The giant's too big. Hey, God's been with me before, and he'll be with me today. And notice as the story continues here in 1 Samuel chapter 17, look at verse 45. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the hosts of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that David is the man. Nope. That what? There's a God in Israel. That there's a God who fights our battles for us. Verse 47, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. Now, here's what I want to ask you, and I want you to really think about this. As David is saying that to the giant, as he is telling him, today I'm going to give you God's going to give me victory over you. We're going to kill you. We're going to take control of this battle, and your army is going to be destroyed and laid in ruin. What was David's faith in that moment? Of course, it's God. But did David know that for sure? Is David a prophet? Could he see the future? Is there any indication in Scripture that God had told him that's what's going to happen? But what did David go out there with? Faith. He trusted in the Lord. And he didn't lean on his or Saul's understanding. He didn't say, you know what, I know God's calling me to fight this giant, but he is too big, and I'm a kid, and he's been studying war since he was a kid. David said, I come to you in the name of the Lord, and today I'll get the victory. That's what it means to trust in the Lord with all of your heart, and to not lean on your own understanding, and in every way acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. You see, Solomon made what seemed like at the moment maybe an inconsequential decision in terms of turning him away from God. He married someone. And it seemed like a pretty good fit. But just 8 chapters later, that one decision turned Solomon's heart completely away from God and toward other gods. So let me ask you this. Who do you feel more like today? Do you feel more like Solomon? Or do you feel more like David? What path are you on right now? A path of faith that's trusting in God? Or a path that's leaning on your own understanding way too much? I want to encourage you today to trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding, and in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. Will you stand with me today with your heads bowed and with your eyes closed just for a moment? I want to ask you guys with your heads bowed and your eyes closed, I want you to really take a moment to just ask your heart just a few questions. In the areas of your life right now where you feel like you're more like Solomon, you're where you shouldn't be. My question to you today is this: will you finally submit to the will of God? Or will you continue to lean on your own understanding? If your marriage is not where it needs to be, are you going to keep doing things the way you think they should be done? Or do you need to make a change today and say, God, I want to trust you in my marriage? With your relationships, with friends, maybe someone you're dating, are you going to continue on the path that you're on right now and lean on your own understanding? Or do you want to have victory in your life today and be like David and trust him? Will you submit to the will of God, or will you continue to lean on your own understanding? Another question. Are there paths that you're on today that you need to get off, but you're struggling to trust God with it? If that's you, I want you to know that God's paths always lead to life. So this next question, why do I hesitate to give God full access and control to every part of my life? What do I fear will happen if I trust God with this area of my life? Do you fear that you're going to lose control? If you're trusting God, you will in some ways, in many ways. But you're giving control to someone who knows where every path leads. And he knows the path to life.